And thank you all so much for being here and joining me for today's asynchronous session, exploring balance through learning, discovering, and fun. All right. And so before we begin, if you can please take a few seconds to complete our attendance form. Pretty straightforward, shouldn't take that long. And just so that you know, the title of today's session is Exploring Balance Through Learning, Discovering, and Fun. And so I'll give you just a few seconds to do that. You can also hit pause if you need more time to complete the attendance form. All right. As you complete that form, just a quick reminder that you all have access to the participant folder. And so remember, the participant folder is where all the resources that I share with you are housed. And also uploaded on the participant folder will always be a copy of the slide deck that we use for the day. And so today, I will be sharing some resources that I've uploaded in there. You should all already have access to this. Hopefully, it's saved in your bookmarks, but just wanted to kindly remind you, right, that this is where all the resources that we've shared are housed and kept in. Okay. And so again, thank you all for engaging with us in today's activities that we have planned for you. Just a reminder, right, that all of the Count Play Explore professional learning resources were made possible by Count Play Explore, which you all know is an early math and science initiative led by Fresno County Superintendent of Schools, Early Care and Education Department. This initiative is generously funded by the California Department of Education and the California State Board of Education. The resources that you all see that we've shared with you have been developed in collaboration by West Ed and other partners and are intended to be used as a guide for implementing evidence-based strategies, promote active learning, and encouraging developmentally appropriate practice in early education settings. All right, and so today we have a session for you packed with activities. And so you will need a couple of resources and materials. And so please feel free to hit pause and to take your time in gathering those materials. They should all be things that are easily accessible. You'll need a cardboard, and this can be around, it doesn't have to be exact 8.5 by 11. I, for example, took cardboard from a box of popcorn that I had in my pantry. You'll be needing scissors, a pencil, tape. If you have a disposable water bottle that still has water in it, so that's still filled. A ball, and this can be something like a tennis ball or a baseball will also work. And then you'll also need an additional piece of cardboard, a square piece of cardboard. Again, it doesn't have to be exactly 11 by 11. I'm using one of my daughter's canvases for that. And so she loves her painting is on this side. She loves to paint. But you can also use a canvas or just a sturdy surface that's approximately 11 by 11 in size. And then you know what? Actually, let me do this. And so this was what I'm using as that second piece of cardboard for one of my daughter's just canvases that she uses to paint on. And so I took some of her art, but it'll be okay. It'll be safe. And so if you can find something that's sturdy, right? So cardboard works and is in a square size around 11 by 11. And then also any small objects or trinkets that you can use to balance on the cardboard. And so just again, anything that's nearby, office supply work. So thinking of like paper clips, binder clips. If you're in a classroom and you have access to like counting manipulatives or counting bears, then that also works. I am at home right now, and so I took my daughter's little box of hair clips And so just anything small, right, that you can place on top of that cardboard. And so feel free to pause the video and gather your materials, and then we'll see you right back in a bit when you all have those. All right. So I'm going to keep moving forward. And so before we begin, a brief welcome activity. And so today's session again is all about exploring balance through learning, discovering, and fun. And so with that, I want us to think ourselves, right? When was or what is something that you've balanced lately? And so this can be a physical object or abstract, right? But I want you just to take a moment and think um, about something that you've balanced recently, right? What were you balancing? Is it easy? Was it easy to balance that thing you thought of? Or maybe it was a little more challenging. And if it was more challenging, what exactly made it challenging, right? And then also, I want you to think about what helped you maintain that balance. And so, if you can just take a few moments to reflect and think about when was the last time you balanced something. And again, this can be an abstract object, I'm sorry, something abstract or an actual physical object. And so take a moment to think about that. And if you can just quickly write it down. And again, just offering some options for your reflection, right? Was this something easy to challenge? Was it difficult? What helped you maintain that challenge? And then again, inviting you to write 2 or 3 sentences and any notes, right? So open-ended if you want to add anything else about what you have identified as one of the most recent things you've balanced, right? Maybe you can also think about what happens when that balance is lost, right? Or what can you do to help restore that balance? I'll share very quickly. I think one of the last things I balanced was let me see, maybe my groceries. You know how it is, right? I will avoid making any more trips to my car than necessary. And so I think the last thing I tried to balance was about like 6 grocery bags. Um, and my living area is upstairs, and so I do have some stairs to go up to with those bags. And so again, I'll do anything possible not to go back downstairs. But yeah, balancing those bags in one single trip upstairs was challenging. Thinking of the weight, maybe I should have done 2 trips, but it's okay. We get it done, right? And so just thought I'd share something in case you needed some ideas. And so I'll give you a few minutes to jot down your thoughts. Again, you could hit pause on the video if you need more time. This is an asynchronous session, so a bit different than what we're used to, right? Collaboration, well, there won't be or minimal collaboration. And so just again, feel free to pause and go at your own pace. All right. So thank you for engaging in that activity. Hopefully you were able to identify one of the most recent things that you've balanced. I remember in another session, some participants mentioned work-life balance, right? And so that one's very, very important, but not something I immediately thought of, right? Um, I remember when first looking at this content myself, I immediately went to just physical objects. And so when someone said work-life balance, I said, ah, yes, right? I need to work on that one. And so I'm wondering and curious, right, to go back and read your reflections and just see what you all identified. Was it physical objects like me with the groceries and trying to carry everything upstairs? And that includes groceries, right? My keys. I didn't have this last time, but I'm usually also trying to balance my iced coffee. And so lots of things going on there. And so I'm looking forward to reading your written reflections on one of the last things that you've balanced. All right, everyone. So We are going to start with just moving our bodies, right? And so we're going to move our bodies to explore today's two big ideas. And so today we'll be exploring the center of gravity or center of mass and base of stability, right? And so instead of me defining them right away, I want to invite you to feel them. And so if you're comfortable at this moment, if you can please stand. And if standing isn't comfortable for you, that's okay. You're absolutely welcome to stay seated and try balancing an object like a pencil or a ruler on your finger. But if you are comfortable with standing up, right, this is a moment where I'm going to invite you to stand up and to first go up on your tippy toes, right? And so if you're able to and you feel comfortable doing so, you're on your tippy toes. Now, after you're on your tippy toes, I want you to raise your hands above your head. And so bring those hands all the way on top, all the way above your head. And as you're doing that, I want you to think, what are you doing to keep yourself balanced? Right? So, are you noticing that maybe your body is making tiny adjustments to stay balanced? Right? Are your muscles maybe working to keep your weight centered? And so when we lift up our bodies like this, right, what we're doing, and so you're on your tippy toes, and you're raising your hands above your head, what your body is doing is raising the center of gravity. And so the higher your center of gravity, the higher it is to balance. I'm going to share this way, and hopefully it helps you maybe get a better visual of what we're supposed to be doing, but on your tippy toes, right? And hands above your head, right? Notice what your body is doing to keep that balance. And again, when we lift our bodies up like this, we raise our center of gravity. And the higher your center of gravity, the harder you'll find it is to balance. And so now we're going to keep moving, but now we're going to shift our base and put your feet further apart, right? And so you're going to move your feet and you're going to place them further apart from each other than when you were when you're standing on your tippy toes. Now I'm going to invite you all again, if you're comfortable, to squat down just a little. And I want you to think, how does squatting down a little with your feet a little further apart feel compared to when you were standing on your tippy toes? Does it feel different? Yes, right? And so what you've done by placing your feet further apart is you've widened your base of stability. And so that area beneath you that supports your body, right? And so your base of stability is the area beneath you that supports your body. And a wider base, in this instance, your feet wider apart, right, is making it easier for you to balance than when you were standing on your tippy toes. And so a low center of gravity and a wider base equals more stability. Interesting, right? And so now again, only if you're comfortable doing so, I'm going to invite you to balance on one foot. And so if you can stand up on one foot, and as you're standing on one foot, I want you to notice, where are your hands going? Are you moving them? Did they move out to the side maybe as you were trying to keep balance? Or what kind of adjustments were you trying to make as you're standing on one foot to try to keep that balance? Good. Now, I'm going to ask you to raise your hands above your head while you're balancing. And as you're raising your hands above your head, think about what is happening. Maybe you experienced a little wobble, or maybe you had to set your foot down very quickly because you lost your balance. And so, as we were raising our hands above our head, did you notice that got a little more difficult? More difficult to keep your balance, that is, right? And so what happened when you lifted your arms above your head is that your center of gravity shifted upward. And when you stand on one foot, your base of stability became even smaller, right? And so, just to recap, remember the center of gravity is where mass is balanced. And your base of stability is that area that supports you. Now, the lower your center of gravity, so remember when you were squatting, right, as opposed to when you were standing on your tippy toes, the lower your center of gravity, as it was when you were doing a small squat, and the wider your base, the more stable you are, right? And so if you participated in that activity, thank you so much. If you just listened in, that's okay, right? But what everybody's bodies just experience is physics and geometry. And so now, I want us to think, right? How might students experience this concept of balance differently if they move and are able to feel it instead of just reading about it, right? And so, how do you think students learning about balance, right, might change if they're giving the opportunity to feel it? And so, for young children, balance isn't just something that we can define for them, right? It's definitely something that they can feel, they can test, and they can explore, right? And so I want us to think, what might children understand more deeply when they can physically experience that balance? Or what kinds of thinking might you notice as they adjust, shift, and problem solve through play, right? And so take a quick moment to think of that and just think, how might students experience this concept differently if they move and if they feel balance instead of just reading about it or instead of just being told the definition of balance? All right. So just a quick recap, right? During our moving session or moment, we went over two very important concepts about balance, right? And that's the center of mass and the base of support. So remember, the center of mass or the center of gravity is a point within an object where its weight is evenly balanced in all directions. It is the point where all the mass appears to be located, right? This is the balancing point of the object. Now, the base of support, the area beneath an object or person that includes every point of contact with the supporting surface, right? And so again, the base of support is the area beneath the object or person that includes every point of contact with the supporting surface. And so I want you to take a look at the pictures you see on the screen, right? Now, on the left, you have a ballerina, and we have football players in the middle, and then a young lady, right, doing the balance beam in a probably gymnastics competition or gymnastics exercise. And so I want you to look at the three visuals, and I want you to try to identify, where do you find the center of gravity in each image? And then what is the base of stability in each one of those pictures, right? And so go back, remember to when you were moving your body, when you were on your tippy toes, when you squatted slightly, and think about, right, where was your mass of gravity? What was your base of support? And then what does that look like for the visuals on the screen, right? Maybe we want to think about who has the smallest base of support, right? Probably the ballerina. All right. So thank you so much for engaging in that. Hopefully you were able to identify the center of mass or gravity for each image and then the base of support. All right. Now we're going to move on to another activity. And so today's packed with activities that we'll be engaging with, that we'll be playing in. Hopefully, when we got to move, you already had a little bit of fun, right? But we're definitely going to keep exploring balance through several activities for today, right? That we ourselves are going to try and practice. And then we're also going to think about how could our students or what could this look like in our classroom, right? And so for this one, I'm going to invite you to go back 2,000 years ago, right, when a Greek mathematician named Archimedes was fascinated by one question. And so he was thinking about finding the balance point of a shape. And he called this the center of gravity. And this is the point where an object balances perfectly, right? And so he was always asking questions. One of the questions he was fascinated with was, where is the balance point of a shape? And so for some shapes, that balance point is obvious. For example, think about a circle. If I asked you where is the center of gravity of a circle, everyone would probably almost immediately point to the center of the circle, right? But for other shapes, that's not always so obvious. And so that brings us into our next activity, right? And so Archimedes discovered that you can find the center of gravity of any triangle by drawing line segments from each vertex to the midpoint of the opposite side, right? And so now what we're going to do is we're going to practice, or we're going to try out Archimedes' theory about finding the balancing point of a triangle. And so what you're going to do is you're going to cut out three triangles of any shape. And so what I did, I told you I just took out a box of popcorn and I tore that up and I cut out three different triangle shapes, right? So you can kind of see them here, three different triangle shapes. One, two, three. And so once you have your 2 to 3 large triangle shapes, right? And these can be different shapes, different sizes. I want us to draw a line segment from each vertex, right? And so you're starting here from each vertex to the midpoint of the opposite side. Right? So let me try to annotate. And so you're going to start off at the vertex and you're going to try your best to locate the midpoint of the opposite side. You're going to draw a line and you're going to repeat the same thing for each vertex, right? And so you can find the midpoint of each side and then draw the line to the midpoint. Or you can start at the vertex, do your best to try to identify the midpoint of the opposite side and draw a line, right? Now, as you do that, I want you to observe where the three line segments intersects, right? And so for this triangle that you see on the screen, it's right here, right? And so at this moment, I'm going to put the timer on. I'm gonna give you time to cut out your triangles, right? If you don't already have them. But cut out your triangles. Again, I just used I got cardboard from a popcorn box I had in my pantry. You could use a cereal box. A paper is probably too thin to do this with, but if you have cardstock available, then that should also work, right? But again, you're gonna cut out three triangles of any shape, of any size, and you're going to draw a line from the vertex to the midpoint of the opposite side, right? And so let me change my sharing, go to content only, and I'll put the timer on for us and give you about 5 minutes to remember, draw the line from the vertex to the opposite side and the midpoint of the opposite side, right? And so I'll put the timer on for 5 minutes as you do that. All right. Thank you so much for getting your triangles ready. Hopefully you had enough time. Again, because this is an asynchronous session, feel free to go at your own pace. If you need to pause, if you needed more time to gather your materials, that's absolutely okay. All right. So now that you have your three triangles, again, any type of triangle and any size, and you've drawn your line segment from each vertex to the midpoint, right? And so you should have those three triangles with three lines from the vertex to the midpoint of the opposite side, and those are called medians. Observe where those lines meet. And so maybe I would help me when I was doing this, and this might be helpful to you, so it's totally up to you if you want to do the same thing. But what I did was I just drew a circle, right, where the three line segments met or intersect. And so that might be helpful for you in the next activity, right? And so where those three lines meet, that's the balance point or the center of mass of the triangle, right? And so we are actually going to try that out. And before we try that out, let me just erase here. Okay, there it goes. And so before we try that out, if it helps, again, you can draw a circle where your three lines intersected, and then we are going to try to balance the triangle, right, by placing our finger at that point of intersection of the three lines. Now you can use your finger or you can use a pencil, right? And so I have a pen here. You can practice balancing the triangle, right, where I've identified where the three lines intersect on your pen or using your finger, right? And so it should look something like this. That's not getting, it's falling apart. It's not. Oh. So I'll keep trying to balance all of my three triangles, right? But I'm gonna put the timer on for 5 minutes where you, right, will try to balance all of your three triangles on your finger, or again, you can use a pencil or a pen if that's a little bit easier for you, right? So I'll go ahead and put the timer, and so now you're exploring, right? Or we're demonstrating if we were able to find the balance point, right? If we were successful in that, then the triangle should balance on our finger or again on a pencil or a pen. And so I'll go ahead and turn on that timer for you. I'll give you 5 minutes. And so feel free again to explore and attempt to balance that triangle on your finger. All right, there it goes. We're back. And so hopefully you had a little bit of fun, right, in trying to balance your triangles. And so just think about as you're balancing your triangles, what did you notice, right? If we did things right, then hopefully you notice that that method works for any triangle, regardless of what type of triangle it is, and then the size of the triangle. If you're like me, you were a little bit challenged in balancing it on your finger, right? And so I struggled a little more with the smaller triangles. But anyway, as you were engaging in that activity, right, I hope that you were also thinking of what it felt like to actually experience having to try to balance something, right? And so again, moving away from simply defying these concepts for our young children and thinking of how we can embed learning opportunities so that they experience, right, these concepts when possible, so that they feel things like balance, right? And so that activity we did there, super low prep, one I think definitely young children can engage with, right? And so again, just centering that before we name a concept, right, when possible, we want to give students the chance to explore it, to test it, to make sense of that concept with their hands and even their bodies, right? And then in speaking of their bodies, we can also think of the activity that we did earlier with I asked you to stand up, right, to try to stand up on your tippy toes, to try to balance on one foot. and then to place your hands above your head, right? And so just thinking, how do you think your students would respond to any of these experiences, right? Whether it's moving your body or balancing the different triangles on their fingers. And to think about what are the things that you anticipate that they notice, right? Or what are some of the things maybe that they'll figure it on their own? Like, for example, if they are standing on one foot, most of them, right? A lot of them will figure out on their own that they'll have to shift their arms in order to help and maintain that balance. Um, I also want you to think about your different types of learners, right? And so, are there any particular students that come to mind who you think might really shine or enjoy this experience, right? And so, also thinking about what strengths might different strengths maybe that aren't always highlighted with just sort of more traditional, right, activities in your classroom. And so, again, just thinking of ways that this could work in your classroom, depending on the context you're in. Just thinking aloud right now, right? But maybe for younger children, the triangle might be challenging, right? But are there any other objects that younger children could explore with balancing? Maybe it's balancing blocks, right? Or maybe it can be stacking objects, or like I said before, even balancing with their own bodies, right? And just thinking of ways to, again, incorporate a more hands-on and play approach as they're developing their ideas about balance, about weight, and about center, right? And all of these early math concepts through play. So again, before we move on to the next activity, I just want you to think, right, how might an experience like this just shift the way your students are currently engaging with math, right? And so just think about that, sit with that as we go into the next activity. And again, please feel free to pause the video if you think you need the time. All right. Now, I just realized that in the list of materials, I missed one very important material. And so let me see if I can go back to that one. I won't go back to the beginning of the slide deck, but in the beginning of the slide deck, right, I began listing with all the materials that you'll be needing for today's session. I forgot to mention that we would be needing a wire. All right, I think it's there. That we'll be needing a wire. And so what I did is I took just a clothes hanger, right? And I untwisted it and I just sort of stretched it out like this and I created this shape. But let me see if you can see it. There you go. Right, and so here's my wire. Again, I took it from a clothes hanger. I was gonna say maybe a pipe cleaner would work if you're in a classroom and those are easily accessible, but I'm thinking now that they might just be they might not be sturdy enough. And so really, a clothes hanger would work really well for this activity. And so again, please feel free to pause the video if you need to run. If you're at home and you have access to a clothes hanger, right? That's made out of wire that you can easily unfold and sort of just doesn't have to be in any particular shape. I've kind of bent the end of this because it was a little too long for me to show you on the screen, and so I bent this side of it. And so again, go ahead and hit pause. And if you have access to this, great. If you don't, go ahead and skip through this section, right? And you can come revisit when you do have access to it. All right, I'm gonna go back to sharing my screen. There it goes. All right. And so now we're going to continue exploring, right, how the center of gravity can change. And so we're going to begin again by trying to balance a straight piece of aluminum wire on your finger. Like I said, I kind of bent mine because it was too long for me to show you on camera. And so whatever works for you, right? If you can keep it as straight as possible, that's great. But now what I want you to do is take your aluminum wire and just try to balance it on your finger. And so as you try to balance it on your finger, right, you're going to do some exploring and you're going to think about, well, where might the center of gravity be on this aluminum wire, right? And so I want you to explore with that. And let me see if I can stop my share so I can show you what I'm doing, right? And so I'm just kind of moving through the wire. And the background kind of isn't the best, but I'm exploring where can I place my finger. Oh, looks like I found the spot, right? So that the wire balances. Nope, shift it a little bit, right? And so once you've collected your wire, I'm going to go back and share my screen. Once you've collected your wire, again, if you can keep it as straight as possible, that'd be great. If you have to bend it a little bit like I did, then that's also okay. But now I want you to explore balancing it on one finger, right? And just think about where or what spot in the aluminum wire are you able to balance it on that one finger, right? And so you're thinking about the center of gravity. Um, After you've done that, now I want you to try balancing it on two fingers, right? And so we're widening that base. And I want you to think as you widen that base of support, what is happening? Did balancing the wire get easier, right? Is it harder? Did you have to shift anything? And so I'm going to give you a little bit of time to explore. And so you're balancing first with one finger, then you're trying two fingers. And then if you haven't already done so, mine's already bent, but if you want to explore with the shape of the wire and bending it in different ways, right? And so shift it, move it around, maybe twirl it if you're able to. And once you do that and you change the shape of the wire, try balancing it again, right? And as you try to balance it again, think, did the balance point change? Did it become easier for you to balance, right? Oh, looks like I kind of bent it in a way where it became super easy to balance on one finger, right? As opposed to where it was a little more stretched out for me. And so I'm gonna put the timer on. You're exploring. Remember, balance it on one finger first, then try two fingers, and then try playing with the shape of the wire, right? And balancing it again. And think about how did the balance point shift or change, if it did at all. And then try to challenge yourself, right? And so I'll put the timer on for 5 minutes as you explore. And so hopefully, like I was saying, you were able to explore. Maybe you bent the wire a couple of different ways. Maybe you positioned it or you bent it in a way that made it super easy for you to balance, right? And so as you were doing that again, exploring in where the center of gravity was on the aluminum wire, right? And thinking also about your base. And so, speaking of base, we're going to continue exploring with the wire, and now we're going to make a stable base. Now, the way that we're going to do that, and so let me see if I could show you here. The way we're going to do that is okay, exit, is by taking your water bottle, right? And so your disposable water bottle. If you have anything else that you think might work, then that's okay. You can give it a try, but it's typically very easy with the disposable water bottle. And what we're going to do is again make a stable base. And we're going to take um, our water bottle and we're going to take our pencil, right? And you're going to tape your pencil to the water bottle. And so let me see if I can just show you the one I've made. And so I just took regular tape, right? I have my water bottle, which isn't in the best conditions, but it works, it'll work. And so you're gonna place your pencil and you're gonna leave it so that it comes out on top, right? Mine maybe is a little too short. And you're gonna tape it, right? And so it'll look like this. Your stable base will look like this. And so I'll give you a couple of minutes to put that together, or actually go ahead and hit pause. And so remember, you're taking your water bottle, tape, and a pencil, hopefully materials that are all easily accessible to you, and you're going to make a stable base. right? And so this is going to act as our base for our wobbly wonder or our wire. I was going to say wire. So this will act as our base for a wobbly wonder. I have trouble saying that. Wobbly wonder. Say that 3 times fast, right? Um, and then we're going to begin exploring by adding objects to our wire. And so first of all, can you get, right, once you've made your stable base, I'm going to lift it up here so you could see it on camera. Can you get your wire to balance on your stable base? Now, this will take some exploring. You might, it looks like I got it there. You might have to bend your wire a certain way to help with the balance. And I'm holding mine up, and so it's a little more challenging for me. You will set yours down on the table, right? And you'll balance your wire on top of that pencil eraser. Ooh, mine's is perfectly balanced. I wish you could see it. There it goes. It fell down. Let me see. Let me go back to sharing my screen. There it goes. All right. And actually, let me stop the share again. I just want to make sure that I'm sharing the correct screen. Yes. And so now you're going to explore, right? But now, once you get your wire to balance on the pencil, as you can see in the image here, you're going to add trinkets or just any object that you can hang on the wire. And so again, you're gonna add items to each side of the wire, and what that'll do, right, is it'll change the weight distribution on the wire. And so you'll have to play with that, and you can add items to each side. Now, feel free to explore. We'll have 15 minutes to do this, so you can continue to add items, reposition them, and I want you to do this until the wire balances evenly on the stable base, right? And so just see how much you can add. Now, the image you're seeing on the screen there has some clothespins. It has some pipe cleaners. We also had, I don't remember what else we added to this, right? But this is actually my creation. Um, I- Find whatever you have at home and whatever is accessible to you or whatever's in your office. And so if you have paper clips, let me see if I can stop sharing so that I can show you what I'm using. And so again, I just took my daughter's little box of hair clips that she has. I'm going to try adding those to the wire. And so I'm just going to hold it up, but I'm going to add them to each side, right? I'm going to play with this. And so the hair clips lend themselves really nicely for this activity. And so we're lucky to find those in quickly in her drawer. But if you have anything you can hang on here, I don't know, maybe I'm thinking of things in your office, right? Or that at your desk that might be easily accessible. Maybe some binder clips. And so I'm holding mine up for you, but you'll explore with adding the objects as it's sitting on your stable base, right? So it should look something like this. This is my stable base, and then there I got it to balance. And so now I'm going to explore and I'm going to keep on adding and I'm going to see how far can I take it, right? And then I also want you to observe the length of the wire on each side, right? Think about the weight distribution. And so as you explore, I'm going to put the timer on. Like I said, feel free to keep adding objects, challenge yourself. There it goes. Challenge yourself, and then we'll come back and just close with a reflection, right, for this activity. Think about what this could look like for students in our classrooms. And then we'll also, oh no, I'm sorry, it's not this one where I was going to say we'll see some classroom applications. Not for this one exactly, but for our next activity we have planned, we will see what it looks like in the classroom. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. I'm going to put the timer for 15 minutes. Again, challenge yourself. Can maybe add that roll of tape you used to create the stable base, right? Anything that you see lying around that you could place on top of the wire hanger. All right. So I'm going to set the timer. All right. So thank you so much for taking the time to just explore with that stable base. And so as you were engaging in that activity, I hope you notice, right, or are able to reflect how you had to keep adjusting maybe where you were placing your pieces on the wire, right? You had to keep maybe testing what objects were you able to place on there to maintain balance, right? And then again, just thinking through and the objects you're placing on the wire, right? So that it just doesn't all come falling down, right? And so that process of experimenting, making small changes and observations, all of that happens, right? And it's fun and it's really what we want learning to look like. And so that's the kind of thinking that we want to make sure that we're creating this space for. And so when our youngest learners explore, they're making sense of ideas on their own. Again, all of this through play, right? And so it's definitely not about getting it right the first time. Frustration is probably expected, right? But that's okay. That's part of staying curious. That's part of being able to try again and going through that productive struggle and being able to figure things out. And so again, just like you did, just how we did, and we engaged in experimenting and making small changes and making adjustments. Our students are also perfectly capable, right, of engaging in this kind of thinking when we make sure that we provide those opportunities for them. And so hoping again that you not only found this fun yourself, right? I remember when I did it, I loved it. Um, and it was funny because I also found myself thinking of my own types of intelligences, right? And while some people created these super intricate wobbly wonders, right? And were able to add all kind of different pieces to it. Well, mine stayed like this, right? But let's just say that there was a lot of more samples that were a lot more creative than mine. And so again, also just thinking about the different types of learners that we have in our class and thinking in our classroom, right, might thrive or excel in an activity like this. All right. And so now I'm gonna move us on. I'm not going to put the timer for this one. You can hit pause if you need to. But I'm going to invite you to take a picture of your wobbly wonder. And so if it's on that stable base, right, and you haven't taken it apart yet, and if you did, if you can very quickly put it back together, maybe I should have warned you that I was going to ask you to take a picture of it. Um, but I would really like to see what you all came up with. And if you can't take a picture of it, then I'm also going to invite you, if possible, right, to draw a diagram. And in that diagram, maybe you can label any parts you want to remember. And so again, thinking about the center of gravity, right, the base of support. And so maybe you can add some of those labels to your diagram if you decide to draw. Again, I'm not going to put the timer on this one. I'm going to just move forward to our next activity. But if you need to pause and capture your picture, then please do that. Or again, if you don't want to take a picture, that's totally okay. Maybe you'd like to draw a diagram instead. And so either one works, either one works. All right. And and so, like I said, now we are going to make an unstable table. And so for this activity, what you'll need is your cardboard cylinder. And so I have mine that I just saved from one of my napkin rolls. And so if you can get your hands on one of these, or the toilet paper rolls also work really well. And then you'll also need either a tennis ball or a baseball also works really well. I had a first thing I found in my garage was this baseball, and so I'm going to be using this one. But if you have a tennis ball or any other ball that's similar, right, that will also work. And then you'll also need a piece of cardboard. Um, Now for this activity, you will need a sturdier surface, right? And so cardboard works really well, but I've also just kind of dug into my daughter's room and searched to see what I can use. And I found that's her artwork, a canvas that she uses for art. And so that's our dog. That's our dog Nacho. And so I found I took one of the canvases that she uses for art, and so I'll be using this as the surface for our unstable table, right? And then what you are also going to need are just items that you feel you can place on top of the table and balance. And so again, anything that's just easily accessible, trinkets around your office, or if you're at home, right? And so I am using, again, I went through my daughter's room. I just picked up her little box of trinkets where she keeps her hair clips and some of the, what are these? The gibbets that she puts on her Crocs. But just a little random stuff, right? And so I was thinking of classroom application, right? I'm sure that you can think of many more other things that you can balance on top of this unstable table, but things like math counters, counting cubes, right? And just any other items like the image you see there on the screen, right? There's a Lego character, and then it looks like a roll of tape maybe, or the cardboard where the tape comes in. And so anything that would balance itself or is reasonable, right, to balance on top of your unstable table. And so what you are going to do with that, right, is you're going to take your cylinder. And so let me see if I can just very quickly, I think it'll be okay. I was going to turn off my background just so that you could get a better picture, but I think you can see it okay. And so you'll take your cylinder, right, and you'll place it on a flat surface. And so I'm doing mine directly in front of me. And then you're going to put your cardboard on top. Oops, sorry, I'm forgetting a step. This is what makes it unstable, right? So you're going to place your ball on top of the cylinder, right? And so make sure it's steady there. And then you're going to place your cardboard surface. And again, I'm using my daughter's. Let me see if you could see it here. Actually, let me turn off my background so that you can see this better. Oops, turn off my video there. Give me just a second. Hmm. Oh my gosh, why can't I do this? There it goes. And so what you're seeing, right, is my unstable table that I created. Again, the cylinder, a ball, and then just a steady surface. Cardboard works. Like if you have a box of cereal that you can cut up, right, that'll also work fine. Just has to be a little sturdy though, right? Because we are going to just play and discover and see how many objects we can place on top and across the surface while still maintaining balance, right? And so again, anything that you have that is easily accessible. And so thinking of maybe cubes. I know in some of the earlier images you saw wooden clothespins, right? And as you're playing around with your unstable table, right? Remember, you're placing objects on top of the surface, and we're thinking, or we want to help our students think, right? About what perhaps would happen if you place an object on one end of the unstable table. And so as you're doing this yourself, right, think about if you can make any predictions or think about what thoughts come to mind, right, as you're placing different objects. Maybe you need to place two items at the stable table on the unstable table at the same time, right? And then of course thinking of questions that we can ask our students like, well, what happened when you place that heavier object, right, on one side of the unstable table, or what are some of the things you notice? And so I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera, put the timer, and let you explore, right? Again, I'm going to be using just my daughter's hair clips. There's some bigger ones in here, some smaller ones. We'll see what we can come up with. But I'm going to go ahead and put the timer for you all. And so again, this is time for you to explore with your unstable table. All right, have fun. All right, everyone. And that's our cue to come back. Hopefully, you had time exploring with the unstable table. And as you were just having fun and playing around with it yourself, right? Again, also thinking of what questions we can ask our students as they're engaging in this activity. So things like, Where do you need to place this object so it doesn't fall, right? How many objects do you currently have on the table? What do you think will happen if we add one more? What do you think we have would happen if we shift this from one place to another, right? Um, and so again, as you were thinking about your unstable table, maybe you connected it back to what we went over in the beginning about the center of mass, right? And so maybe you were able to identify what was the center of mass or gravity, right? And again, thinking that this is a point within an object where its weight is evenly balanced in all directions, and it's the point where all the mass appears to be located. And so it's the balancing point of an object. And so were you able to locate that in your unstable table? And then also thinking about your base of support, which remember is the area beneath the object or person that includes every point of contact with the supporting surface. Also, if you remember in the beginning of the session, I mentioned that the further away an object is from the surface, the harder it is to find balance. And so I'm curious to know if any of you used the cylinder from the roll of napkins, or maybe you used a toilet paper cylinder roll, right? Which would make it closer to the surface. And thinking of maybe those of you who use that found it easier to balance the objects on the unstable table. Um, and so now, again, hopefully you had fun. The little Lego figure on that you see in the screen is fun. Just thinking of all the objects, right, that you can place on the table. And again, easily accessible things that you should have in your classroom and thinking of implementing with students. And so now I'm going to invite us to watch this video. It's a short video. It doesn't have any sound, but I found it super valuable in seeing application in real life classrooms, right? And also different versions of the unstable table. And so I'm going to go ahead and just click out of this one because it is on Vimeo. And so I'm going to go ahead and share the video. Now, as you're watching the video and you see different examples of the unstable table, right? Think about what this could possibly look like in your context, right? So in your classroom, in your capacity, what version maybe of the unstable table exercise would work well with your students or in the classrooms of the teachers that you currently support. And so let me go ahead and click play and I'll move us over to full screen. All right. So hopefully looking at some of those classroom applications started giving you some ideas. We saw different varieties of the unstable table, right? Some super easy and simple. I mean, did you catch the one where they just had a rock? They students probably found outside, right? And had the cardboard surface on top of the rock. Other kiddos were exploring with balancing some sticks. People can get super creative with these, right? I've seen some students also create depending on their materials, right? But like a storyline on top of their unstable table. And so I saw an instance once where they had little characters and counting cubes, and the students were working on just playing around with the unstable table, right? But it was through that play that they decided to create a campfire setting on top of their unstable table, right? And so you can also create stories on top of these tables. And so just a ton of things that you can do with the unstable table, right? And just different variations of them. And I hope you notice, right, that low prep materials, most of them, right, are easily accessible. There's some other things you can add, of course, but again, if you don't have access to all of those materials, this is something that could be done and that children could engage in and explore with and have fun with, right, in the spaces of their classrooms with just thinking of materials that are easily accessible. And so hopefully you liked seeing those examples and maybe you yourself started generating some ideas, right, of what this could look like in your context. And so again, I won't put a timer here, but I'm going to ask you if you still have it up, if you can quickly take a picture of your unstable table and of what you created. Or I'm going to also invite you, if you don't want to take a picture of it, if you can just quickly draw a replica or a model, I'm sorry, a diagram of your unstable table, right? And then thinking again, are there any parts you want to remember? And so you might want to label and identify. Again, the center, the balancing point, the center of gravity, or maybe the base of support, right? And so thinking of that bottom part of the cylinder that touches the surface, anything you want to label. And so I'm going to invite you all to just take a moment. If you can pause the video, snap your picture, or take a few minutes to draw your diagram, that would be super cool for us to see and share with each other, right? Some of our creations. Oops, there it goes. All right. And as you're engaging in all of these activities, right, I hope they were super fun for you. They're fun for me. I remember when I sat on the same workshop, I absolutely loved it. Not only did I myself as an adult have fun exploring, right, but also began thinking of, well, how does this connect to learning or to my learning foundations and learning standards, right? And so over at CPE, they've done a great job at identifying, right, what skills students are working through in activities like the unstable table and the wobbly wonders, right? And so for our younger learners, we're thinking about um, uh, communication skills and knowledge, right? Their perceptual development, their attention to maintenance. They're working on spatial relationships, on cause and effects. What happens if I add a figure to one side and I don't add it to the other side, right? They're problem solving. Even in the video you saw, there was a girl that was shifting where she was placing her unstable table, right, to get a better balance. They're thinking of classification and they're working on their gross and motor skills, right? On their gross and fine motor skills. And so all of this from the infant and toddler learning foundations. For our students who are a bit older, right? Let me see if I can shift this. There it goes. Sometimes hard to navigate. Okay, that's okay. All right, and then in thinking of our pre-K, TK science learning foundations, right? Our students are engaging in making observations. They're comparing and contrasting. They're continuously asking questions. They're defining problems, making predictions. They're using tools, right? And then, of course, if you ask them to draw a diagram or document their learning in a way that's developmentally appropriate, then they're documenting their observations using models that they're making, right? They're engaging in mathematical thinking. And again, they are formulating and communicating their explanations. And then all of this, if in some instances, right, in most, this was collaborative work. And so you definitely want to think of, can I set this activity up so that my students are working with other students, and then together they're negotiating, bouncing ideas off of each other, which is also a great way to help develop language, right? And we'll get a little more in depth into that in the next slide. For NGSS standards in K through third, so students are engaged in asking questions, right? They're developing and using models. They're planning and carrying out investigations. They're using mathematics and computational thinking. And so again, just some of the ways that our learning foundations and the NGSS standards are seen and visible and come to life through these activities. All right. And I mentioned language earlier, right? And so, as you all know, CABE has a huge focus and commitment to supporting multilingual learners. And so, one of the best ways, right, that's not only developmentally appropriate, but the most efficient ways to help develop language, is to engage students, right, and model that language and practice that language, not only input but output, also as they're engaging in play and in meaningful hands-on activities, right? And when students engage in that, or when we create the opportunities for students to engage with hands-on activities, what is happening is that they're connecting maybe the abstract, the language part, to something concrete, right? And so again, the development of language alongside hands-on activities, right? More concrete activities is great for thinking of developing language, especially for our multilingual learners, right? And so just some of the language standards and alignment that students could be engaging with should you decide to try out one of these activities, which we really hope that you do, right? But at Strand 1.0, listening and speaking in the pre-K, TK learning foundations, right? Students are understanding and using vocabulary. They're using words like balance, equal, right? They're understanding and using words for categories. They're using size and location works, right? Are you going to place it above the unstable table, right? Are you going to move it to the left or to the side or forward? And then, of course, in these conversations, they're using grammatical features and sentence structure. They're asking questions. They're constructing their narratives. They're sharing their explanations and their reasoning and their opinions, right, with their peers. And all of this, again, at the same time as they're engaging with hands-on play-based activities. And so for our older learners, this is directly from the California ELD standards, right? And so again, if you're thinking of implementing this in your classrooms and thinking of how are you supporting language development during your instructional days, and so thinking of integrated ELD, right? Which remember, if in our classroom spaces we have even only one single student who is classified as an English language learner, as educators, we are responsible to provide a language development supports for that student, right, during the day. And so again, connecting it back to our English language development standards, and as students are engaging again on these in these concrete play-based inquiry right centered activities, students, this is the best time to help develop language. And again, directly connected to the ELD standards, students are interacting in meaningful ways, right? They're collaborating and exchanging information and ideas with others and their peers through oral collaborative conversations, including, right, academic topic, which obviously this is. They continue to interact in meaningful ways, right? By collaborating, offering and supporting others' opinions, negotiating with others, right? And so I don't know if you saw in that video or you noticed that there were some students collaborating with each other. Some of them had agreed to place two objects at the same time on top of the table. Some students were moving other students' objects around, right? And so again, as an educator, thinking of how can I sort of capitalize on these meaningful hands-on opportunities that you're designing for your students so that you're also, right, using this time to help students develop language. And then speaking of developing language, I also wanted to share with you, right, that Count Play Explore does an amazing job at providing literacy connections or books, right, to some of their just PDs that they've designed, right? And so for this one, they've identified the book that by by Ellen Stolf Walsh, right, and connects really nicely to all of these activities and exploring balance. And then alongside with the book that they've identified, right, they've also created and designed a book guide, which will give and educators can use this. You can also share this with families, but just to guide as you're going through a read aloud with some suggestions about questions to ask, right? About maybe vocabulary words that you could be emphasizing during the read aloud. And then also they've developed an activity connected to the book, right? And so, in thinking of designing your lesson cycles, for example, on the balancing act, beginning with play, and so all of the activities that you saw today, even the balancing your body one, right? And then maybe connecting it with literacy. Now, there's variety in ways you can do this, right? But I usually would recommend giving students the experience first, so that then if background knowledge is maybe limited, right, then you can have students engage and connect with the concept, right? Play with the concept, explore the concept themselves, and then later introduce the book so that when they're reading the book, they'll have experiences to connect, right, to their background information. Um, and so a lot of the times I know what we see is a reading of the book first, which debatable, right? Could work, could not work. But for things like this, I would maybe think of designing my lesson cycle where I make sure that I provided the space and gave students the experience, right, of them feeling balance, exploring balance themselves, so that when the book comes around, they'll have background information to connect to, right, that they could relate to. And so just some thoughts and some ideas on how you could develop your lesson cycle. And so here's the book. It's a short book, and so I think we can read it. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself.
Walsh. The mice made a teeter-totter. It was fun to balance. One mouse on each end. Ta-da! But then a salamander wanted a turn. Luckily, a friend stepped in to help. Perfect. Balance again. Uh-oh, a frog. Whoa! But then another frog. Ah, balance once more. Oh no, a bird wants to balance. Whoops, that's not going to work. Or maybe it will. Ta-da! But not for long. Too many balancers. Time for everyone to find something else to do. Except the mice. Ta-da!
All right, so just a quick super fun read that you can share with your students. I love that problem solving when the bird wants to join and everyone else is like, this isn't going to work. And so I don't know, right? Just thinking of what this could look like in your classroom, what activities you could do, how you can connect this with the unstable table or with the wobbly wonder, right? I'm pretty sure that you can find a way to maybe even recreate that story using the unstable table or the wobbly wonder activity. Um, and so just thinking out loud, right? Sharing ideas. I hope that as you were watching the book, as you were engaging in play with the unstable table, as you were exploring your wobbly wonder, right? You were maybe already beginning to think, I could do this in my classroom, but maybe I would adapt it this way. Or maybe for my students, it'll look slightly different and I can do it this way. And so I'm just going to ask you all now, right, as we come to the close of our session, what activities would be appropriate in your setting and why? Why do you think they would work, right? And then maybe what other activities have you already implemented? And so a space to share, right? That you've already implemented that connect with balance, right? If any. And if you haven't, that's totally okay. And then any other reflection that you want to add to this, that's okay. These are just some suggestions. But again, just thinking of hopefully the way that you yourself had some fun in engaging with these activities, right? And thinking of bringing that to your students. So you can go ahead and hit pause, but just some reflections, right, about how this could look like in your context or how maybe you would adapt the activity for your students, right, depending on their age, on their grade level, or just context, right? What would work, what wouldn't for you? And that brings us to the end of our session. And so, if you can please fill out the feedback form, we would appreciate it very much. Also, we'll put the link for you, right, to access that feedback form. But I did want to show you, right, that the resources that I shared with you for the book guide, I've uploaded those on our shared participant folder. Um, and also, oh, on here, also the triangle activity that we did. And so a guide to that. The book guide is also available here. And so I just wanted to take a closer look at that, right? And so just questions that you might pose for your students to nourish, right, inquiry thinking. And so, for example, will one apple balance with one apple? Why or why not, right? And so again, very conceptual or questions that develop conceptual understanding of balance or concepts like equal, right? And so that's available for you in the participant folder. The book guide is also available in Spanish if you would like to share with families. And then an activity, right? And so remember, I mentioned that most of the book guides have a link to additional activities that you can do in your classroom. Um, and so for this one, right, if you have skills available, you would encourage children to play with them and investigate the function of the scale. And of course, if you do have a scale, then you can connect it to the book, right? And then students again encouraging them to record their observations by drawing pictures of their results. And so again, documenting student learning. And so this is available for you in the participant folder. And then I hope, right, you notice that I didn't have the physical book, but YouTube is amazing. And so you can find most of these books and read aloud versions on YouTube. And so you can also, if you don't have access to the actual book, right, just look up some of these read alouds on YouTube. And so, yeah, that brings us to the end of our session. Thank you so much. Hopefully, you had some fun with some of those activities, right? And again, we'll meet soon in our coaching sessions and then talk about, right, what supports or how we can help you, right, bring this back to your implementation spaces so that your students also enjoy these activities. And again, just thank you so much for being here.